I hadn't been home in 3 years. The silence that greeted me said more than words ever could. The cold brass doorknob hadn't changed. Neither had the stiff bushes along the walkway or the overly polished windows, glinting like judgmental eyes. But the weight pressing on my chest, that was new. Or maybe it had always been there, waiting like a splinter under the skin that only hurts when touched. Dad's last message had been curt. Thanksgiving is for family. If you're still part of it, come. A challenge dressed like an olive branch. Typical Donald Bennett. Even his invitations carried terms and conditions. I stood there for a second longer, then rang the doorbell. A beat. 2, 3. The door opened, and there he was, not older, not kinder, just exactly as I remembered. Stern face, disapproving frown, the gray hair combed so precisely it might have been lacquered on. "Emily," he said. No smile, no warmth. Then, "The guest has arrived." Not daughter, guest. I stepped inside, careful not to let my heels click too loudly on the marble floor. The house smelled of lemon polish and something overcooked. A vase of fresh chrysanthemums stood in the foyer. Chloe's favorite. Of course. Shoes off. My mother called from the living room without looking up. I slipped them off, biting back a sigh, and padded into the room. Susan Bennett sat by the fireplace, hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes lifting just long enough to acknowledge me with a ghost of a smile. A white tablecloth was folded over her arm, delicate blue embroidery catching the light. She held it out toward me. "For the table this weekend," she said. I took it automatically. The stitches spelled one word in cursive, Chloe. Of course they did. "I assume she'll be hosting," I said. "Chloe has a way with guests," my mother replied, which in her language meant, "You don't." I nodded, smoothing the fabric with my thumb. I could still remember sitting with my mother in this room, cross-stitching birds while she corrected my posture. That was years before she decided Chloe was the one worth investing in. Dinner was already set in the dining room. Quiche, salad, some soup I didn't recognize. No one asked me if I'd eaten. No one poured me wine. I sat anyway, taking the seat closest to the kitchen, the one furthest from Dad. He didn't look at me while he spooned soup into his bowl. Is the company still holding out? I kept my face still, the quiche halfway to my mouth. 1,000 replies fought their way up my throat. Revenues, mergers, the new office in Singapore. But I swallowed all of them. "Better than most," I said, my smile tight and practiced. Donald grunted. "That industry's a dying horse." "It's a good thing I'm not riding it," I replied. He finally looked at me, eyes narrow. "You don't have leadership qualities. Never did. Nathan's different. He understands how to manage people." There it was. Nathan. Not just my ex, not just the man I once imagined marrying, but now Chloe's partner, according to Mom's Facebook post last month. I laid my fork down. My fingers were stiff. I wanted to say something clever, something devastating. Instead, I reached for my water glass and drained it. "He's got charm," Susan added, like a benediction. "And vision." So had I, until they all decided Chloe was the heir apparent. Donald leaned back. "Emily, leadership isn't about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about presence, confidence, something you've always lacked." The words didn't sting. They carved. But I'd been flayed by him too many times before. These were just old cuts reopening. I looked around the room. Everything had changed. Or maybe it had just settled. Shifted permanently to a version of reality where I was the outsider, the forgotten branch on the family tree. I stood, slowly, calmly, folded the napkin next to my plate. No one stopped me. At the threshold of the hallway, I glanced over my shoulder. Maybe they thought I'd leave without a word. Maybe they'd already filed me away under unreliable. I looked toward the front door, my voice low but clear. Maybe it's time to show them who I really am. And I meant every word. Not a single photo of me on the hallway wall. Just Chloe. Chloe and Nathan. I hadn't noticed it last night. Maybe I hadn't wanted to. But now, in the filtered light of morning, the omission was like a scream in an empty room. Their smiles greeted me from every angle. Chloe in her cap and gown, Chloe with her violin, Chloe posing beside Nathan in front of the Hamptons house I didn't know they'd visited. The frames were heavy, gold-lined, chosen carefully to match the cream wallpaper and the polished floor beneath. Like museum pieces, untouched, curated. I walked the entire hallway twice before I was forced to admit it. There was no trace of me. I had walked through this house like a ghost, and now I realized I had been made into one. Upstairs was quieter, still air. The guest room they'd put me in was sterilized, impersonal. None of my childhood furniture, none of my trophies. I hadn't expected much, but the erasure felt deliberate. Surgical. In the living room, the biggest frame sat squarely over the mantel. Chloe, flanked by our parents with Nathan's arm curled confidently around her waist. I blinked. That photo had been taken in this very house. That used to be my place. Beside Nathan, in front of that mantel, in a red dress I'd bought for Christmas Eve 3 years ago. Except now I was gone. I stepped closer, examining the background. There, right at the corner of the couch, only half visible, was the shadow of a hand. My hand. The rest had been cropped out. I sank into the nearest armchair, my stomach twisting. I had paid for their roof when the recession hit. I'd covered Chloe's tuition when Dad refused to waste money on a degree in music. I'd once flown home in the middle of a corporate acquisition just to take Mom to the hospital. And now I didn't exist. I rubbed my eyes and stood. The drawers in the side cabinet clicked softly as I opened them. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe proof that I hadn't imagined it all. Maybe a thread of kindness left behind. But most drawers were filled with Chloe's recital programs and Mom's favorite linen sets. Until one caught my attention. A slim white envelope, unmarked except for a date in the corner. March 2019. Inside was a typed letter on firm stationery signed Jenkins. I knew that name. Dad's old accountant. Jenkins had worked with me once when I was managing the transfer of our family's remaining real estate portfolio after the crash. I read the letter twice. It was addressed to Donald. Mr. Bennett, I urge you to reevaluate the decision to grant Nathan full authority over the accounts. There are inconsistencies in the quarterly filings, including discretionary expenditures that have no client justification. I am formally recommending a pause on any further transfer until we complete a third-party audit. I have also notified your daughter, Emily, as a precaution. Except, I had never received any notification, so the letter had never reached me. I stared at it, pulse drumming in my ears. Nathan had been stealing. And Jenkins had tried to warn them. Warn me. But the letter was buried. Footsteps. Quick. Heels clicking. I folded the letter quickly and slid it back into the envelope just as Susan stepped into the doorway. She was holding a laundry basket, wearing her usual morning face. Powdered, but not too much. "You're up early," she said, her eyes sweeping the room. I shrugged. Couldn't sleep. Her gaze landed briefly on the open drawer. Still snooping? I closed it gently. Just trying to find a coaster. She placed the basket down on the sofa and turned to me, her voice light but razor sharp. "Don't dig up old stories, Emily. This house has enough ghosts already." I smiled, tight-lipped. I'm not looking for ghosts. Just what's mine. She tilted her head slightly, then left, basket in hand. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, I exhaled. I took the letter again and slipped it into my handbag, heart pounding. Back upstairs, I sat at the edge of the guest bed, clutching my phone like a lifeline. I didn't know what I expected, but the screen blinked with a single unread message. "If you still care about what's yours, meet me tomorrow." L. I didn't recognize the number. Linda? It had been years since I'd heard that name. My old colleague fired after a whistleblowing scandal that went nowhere. She had known Nathan too well. The carpet was worn beneath my toes. I stood and turned toward the window. The backyard looked the same, a little faded, like everything else. I glanced toward my suitcase. I could leave. Right now. Drive back to Manhattan and never look back. But something caught my eye on the dresser. A photo frame lying flat, almost hidden. I picked it up. It was a family photo from my graduation. The original one, taken by Aunt Margot. We were all in it. Me, Donald, Susan, Chloe. But the glass was cracked. And my face, my part, had been torn out, jagged and brutal, leaving only empty space where I once stood. My knees buckled slightly as I sat on the bed. No accident. I wasn't just forgotten. I had been erased. I grabbed my keys and rushed to the car, slamming the door harder than necessary. My breath hitched as the engine hummed to life. I gripped the steering wheel, staring out at the driveway, lips trembling. Let's see how deep this rot goes. His smile was the same, polished, fake, and dangerous. Nathan stepped into the room like he owned it. He always had that knack. One foot through the door, and he made every head turn, every conversation pause. Even now, years after walking out of my life without a word, he had the same smug ease, the same shine to his teeth, the same laugh that sounded expensive. I stood near the entryway, unnoticed, watching as Chloe practically floated toward him, her heels tapping like applause. Her arms looped around his, her voice rising an octave when she introduced him to a pair of older guests as Nathan, my soon-to-be fiancé. The words landed like a stone in my chest. Nathan smiled, flashing that trademark grin, then turned to Donald. "Dad," he said, and I saw Donald beam as if the word didn't make every part of me recoil. "Glad you made it, son," Donald said, clapping Nathan on the shoulder. "Couldn't have pulled this party together without you." They looked like a family, a picture-perfect trio, father, daughter, and the golden boy. And then there was me, standing alone holding a glass of untouched wine. The room was dressed in autumnal golds and oranges, subtle and expensive, just like everything Susan touched. The pre-Thanksgiving dinner had turned into a full-blown networking event. Real estate agents, lawyers, old business friends. People who remembered me only vaguely, if at all. "Emily," Chloe chirped, finally noticing me. Her smile tightened. "You can sit over there." She gestured behind her, toward the side table. It was smaller, tucked near the kitchen. A folding chair pulled up awkwardly against the wall, beside the sink. Like a caterer. Like staff. I didn't move right away. My eyes darted to Susan, who was rearranging a cheese board with clinical precision. She didn't look up. Neither did Donald, who was deep in conversation with two investors, bragging about Nathan's newest insights into the company's books. "I told him," Donald said proudly. "You're the only one I trust to manage that portfolio. Chloe's lucky." Nathan responded with a modest shrug, like someone used to praise but still pretending to be humble. "I've just streamlined the reports. We don't want things getting lost in the clutter." I sat at the side table. The clink of utensils and soft jazz from the stereo filled the silence that wrapped around me like insulation. The main table erupted in laughter, Nathan at the center of it all. He caught my gaze and raised his glass. I didn't return the gesture. He stood and made his way over, loosening his collar slightly, oozing charm with every step. "Still working at... what was it?" he asked, just loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "That little investment place?" The word little burned. A woman beside him stifled a laugh behind her wine glass. I took a slow sip of water. "We're doing fine. Doubled our returns last quarter." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Good for you. Some people were born to lead. Some are just good at writing reports." He tapped his glass against mine, a mock toast. My fingers tightened. I wanted to say 1,000 things. That I was a majority stakeholder. That without me, half the people in this room would still be begging for seed money. That I had carried this family through the 2008 collapse while Nathan had been busy charming trust funds out of other people's daughters. Instead, I smiled thinly. True leadership usually involves more than fraud. But what do I know? He tilted his head, just slightly, a warning in his eyes, but I'd already stopped caring. I looked down at my phone. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in years. Linda. I tapped her message open. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Cafe Grange, bring what you have. I'll bring what they buried. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Then I raised my chin, stared across the room at Nathan, still laughing with Donald, still basking in the spotlight that wasn't his to begin with. I typed one word. Yes. Then I lifted the phone to my ear and walked out the back door. Linda, let's talk. I'm in. You didn't just take my love, Nathan. You took my future. The words still clung to the back of Emily's throat as she stepped into the muted hum of Cafe Grange. The place smelled like burnt espresso and ambition. Bankers and lawyers murmured over their laptops, espresso cups rattled against saucers, and baristas moved with the clinical precision of surgeons. She slid into a leather booth in the far corner, hidden behind a potted ficus, heart thudding like it had something to say but didn't know how. Linda was already there, a plain blazer over a dark turtleneck, fingers laced tightly around a cup of tea gone cold. She looked older than Emily remembered, lines deeper, eyes sharper, but the resolve in her posture hadn't dulled. You look good, Emily said quietly. Linda gave a small, humorless smile. You look like someone who's had enough. They sat in silence for a moment, the past unspoken between them. Then Linda reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folded printout. He took your deal, Emily. You remember Northstone Investments? Emily's chest tightened. Of course she remembered. It was her idea, her connections, her pitch. She'd worked on it until her fingers cramped and her voice cracked. The day they closed, Nathan had kissed her in the elevator and whispered, "We did it." Linda slid the paper across the table. This is the internal summary. Sent to the board, listing Nathan as lead negotiator. No mention of you. None. Emily scanned the lines, the ink bleeding into her vision. The document was dated a week after she'd left the firm. A week after they broke up. She closed her eyes. The betrayal had been personal and professional. Linda wasn't done. She took out a thumb drive and placed it gently on the table. Meeting transcript, October 2nd, 2021. Donald signs an amendment to the company charter, removing you from succession consideration. Nathan pushed it. Susan co-signed. Emily stared. My father signed me out of his legacy? Linda nodded. The language is vague, but it's effective. And no one told you. They filed it quietly. You were out of the country. Jenkins protested, but he was fired, Emily finished. I thought it was just downsizing. It wasn't. He was loyal. That was the mistake. Emily's breath hitched. The house, the silence, the glances, they made sense now. They weren't just erasing her emotionally. They were scrubbing her from every structure that held power, every document, every asset. She reached for the thumb drive, her fingers brushing against Linda's. Why did you keep this? Linda's answer was almost a whisper. Because I knew one day you'd come back different. Emily swallowed hard. She had come back different. Not just older, not just angrier. She'd come back armed. But Linda wasn't finished. She reached into the briefcase one more time, this time with more care, and produced a small key on a faded leather loop. This is the drive Jenkins encrypted, Linda said, before they locked him out. It contains ledgers, years of fund transfers, and 2 accounts offshore. Nathan's name won't be on them, but the IP addresses, they tell a different story. Emily took the key in her palm. It felt heavy, real. And for the first time since she stepped foot back into that house, she felt a spark that didn't burn with pain, but with purpose. I'll need Jenkins, Emily said. Do you know where he is? Linda gave a short nod. He's in Westchester, works part-time at a community firm, keeps his head down. But if he sees you, I'll find him. Emily interrupted. Their eyes met. No more small talk. No more reminiscing. This wasn't about the past anymore. It was about what came next. Linda leaned back, sipping her cold tea like it was victory. Happy Thanksgiving, Emily. Let's give them a holiday they'll never forget. They served turkey. I served truth. The dining room gleamed under a chandelier that once felt like home. Now, it swung like a judge's gavel overhead, each crystal catching the artificial warmth of a night that reeked of forced civility. The long mahogany table was set for 10, but only one seat felt like it wasn't meant to be filled. Mine. Donald sat at the head, carving the turkey with the precision of a man who still believed he ruled something. Chloe, radiant in a new burgundy dress, leaned into Nathan with casual affection, while Susan filled wine glasses in silence. Around them, a smattering of relatives made small talk, ignoring my presence with a talent perfected over years. Then the doorbell rang. Ronald Myers stepped in with a leather coat slung over his arm and a bottle of wine that likely cost more than my mother's car. Donald's eyes widened in surprise, a flicker of unpreparedness in a man who hated surprises. Ronald, I didn't know you'd actually come. Got bored of caviar, Myers said with a smile, then turned to survey the room. His eyes paused on me. And who's this? Before I could answer, Donald cut in. Oh, that's Emily, my eldest. Just back for the holidays. Ah. Myers tilted his head. Emily Carter? Donald chuckled uncomfortably. No. Emily's not in finance. She was, what was it? Accounting? I didn't blink, just took a sip of wine and waited. But Myers didn't drop it. His brow furrowed. That's strange. Carter Holdings has a 30% stake in our biggest real estate portfolio. I've met their director. Name's Emily Carter. She looked a lot like you. The room froze. Even the clink of silverware stopped. Susan's hand trembled slightly over the gravy boat. Chloe blinked like someone had just flicked on a spotlight too bright. Nathan's smile faltered, but just for a second. Donald's voice broke the silence, brittle and forced. There must be some mistake. There isn't, Myers said, his tone now sharp with realization. Unless you have another daughter in high finance. My fork hit my plate with a clean, definitive clink. I stood, slow and deliberate, lifting my glass. Not for a toast, but to reclaim my space. The silence was delicious. Now that we've cleared that up, I said, letting my voice glide through the awkward stillness. Shall we talk about the offshore accounts? Susan's hand dropped the gravy spoon. Nathan straightened in his seat, his smile now frozen in place. Donald's face, once flushed with self-satisfaction, had gone the color of raw dough. Chloe looked from me to Nathan and back, like a child watching a magician's trick fail mid-performance. I placed my glass down gently. I didn't come back for turkey. I came back for the truth. And I have receipts. Myers narrowed his eyes, suddenly more interested than ever. Nathan cleared his throat. Emily, this isn't the time. No, I interrupted. It's exactly the time. Behind me, the flames in the fireplace crackled louder, like they too were waiting for what would come next. I reached into my clutch and retrieved a small USB drive, twirling it between my fingers. This, I said, voice low but clear, contains documents, transfers, and meeting records. It tells a very different story from the one you've all rehearsed. Donald finally found his voice. You're making a scene. Not yet, I said. But don't worry, the second act is coming. Myers looked from Donald to Nathan, then back to me. I'd like to see that data. I'll send it to your office tonight, I said. I wouldn't want you to lose your appetite. No one laughed. Susan finally spoke. Emily, you've always had a flair for drama. I met her eyes. And you've always had a talent for silence. The air was thick, so thick I could hear my heartbeat over the chatter of a once proud family unraveling. For years, they'd dined on my absence, seasoning it with self-righteousness and swallowed lies. Tonight, I'd changed the menu. Chloe pushed back her chair slightly but said nothing. Nathan looked like he wanted to run. Donald sat in stunned paralysis, his authority crumbling under the weight of something far greater than embarrassment. Exposure. The chandelier above us no longer looked regal. It looked like a spotlight. And I was finally the one holding the script. Let them taste discomfort. Let them chew on regret. Let them know I was done being the ghost at their table. Because tonight they served turkey, and I served truth. Some files were deleted, others were buried, until now. The hum of the server rack in the corner was the only sound that filled the room. Outside, New York's skyline sparkled like it didn't care who got burned down below. Emily sat alone in her private office, the glow of dual monitors painting tired shadows across her face. Midnight had come and gone, but sleep wasn't part of her plan tonight. She clicked open the encrypted folder Linda had helped her recover. The contents loaded with a flicker, and then nothing. Blank directories, dozens of them, no visible files. But Emily had learned long ago, absence wasn't the same as emptiness. She opened the metadata viewer, her eyes narrowing as columns of last modified dates populated the screen. There was activity. Someone had accessed these folders, edited files, deleted them, but not carefully enough. Her Zoom window lit up. Linda appeared, her face pale in the low light of her own apartment. "Nothing there?" she asked. Emily didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled up the metadata trace. They scrubbed it, but they didn't scrub smart. Linda leaned closer. Check the autosave temp folder. Backups hide in strange places. Emily dove into the depths of the hidden system files. A folder marked .tmp_everspring blinked into existence like a ghost emerging from fog. She clicked. An Excel spreadsheet loaded. Rows and rows of green and white cells filled the screen, populated with transaction records. Names, amounts, descriptions. What looked like petty consultant fees quickly ballooned into 6-digit transfers, and always to the same destination, Everspring LLC. Emily stared at the listed address. Cayman Islands, a fund she'd never heard of. A name that never once came up in Donald's endless bragging about his financial empire. This fund wasn't registered under your father's name, Linda murmured, watching through the screen. Or Nathan's. It's masked behind shell layers. Someone went through a lot of trouble to hide this. Emily scrolled further. The pattern repeated every quarter. A new deposit. Disguised. Laundered. Shifted again. Then came a note in the memo field of one transfer. Consulting retainer, Chloe Carter, $250,000. Emily froze. Her fingers hovered above the trackpad. Chloe? The file hadn't been touched in over a year, not since Jenkins's account was deactivated. She searched again, this time by sender. Dozens of old emails filtered in. One subject line stood out like a match head. REI tried to stop this. Emily opened the thread. It was from Jenkins. I warned them. Told Donald this was dangerous. Nathan laughed. And when I said I wouldn't sign off, he threatened my daughter. I had no choice. I'm sorry. The message was short, panicked, dated 3 days before Jenkins quit. Emily leaned back in her chair, breath shallow. The betrayal clawed through her stomach. Old wounds scraped raw again. She had thought Chloe was merely passive, a bystander, maybe even deceived. But this? Chloe, she whispered. Linda was silent, letting the weight settle. Is there anything else on the drive? Emily asked finally, her voice tight. There might be fragments. I can comb through. But Emily, this is enough to build a case. Emily didn't respond. She was already tracing lines in her head. Money, lies, power. What Chloe had always had with ease. What Emily had fought tooth and nail for. The house, the praise, the father's pride. And now, $250,000 labeled consulting. Her eyes drifted to the side to an old picture tucked into the bookshelf. A photo of her and Chloe when they were little, arms around each other, wearing matching Thanksgiving dresses. That was before Chloe chose a different kind of loyalty, one measured in wire transfers and silence. She dragged the photo closer, stared at it, then set it down face first. "I need to talk to Jenkins," she said aloud. "I thought he disappeared." "People like Jenkins don't disappear. They hide, and I know where to look." Linda nodded once, then the call ended. The office lights remained off, the monitors the only glow in the room. But the warmth Emily felt wasn't from the screens. It was from something colder, sharper. Resolve. She saved the file, encrypted it again, then backed it up in 3 locations. Then she stood, her legs slow from sitting so long, but her mind racing. This wasn't just about Nathan anymore. It wasn't just about Donald. Emily stared at the transfer screen one last time, her voice barely above a breath. "Chloe, what have you done?" "I thought you'd never come back," he said. "But I always kept this, just in case." The air in the parking lot tasted like engine smoke and cold regret. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering just enough to cast long, uncertain shadows across the cracked asphalt. Emily stood next to her car, arms crossed beneath her coat, watching the night for movement. Then he emerged. Jenkins walked with a slight limp now, his security uniform hanging loose on his thinner frame. The once sharp features of a corporate financial officer had faded into a lined, tired face. But his eyes, soft and tired, still held the kind of honesty she remembered. "I didn't think you'd actually come," she said. He gave a slow shrug, the kind that said he'd spent years carrying weights that never truly left. "I owe you that much. You trusted me once. And I didn't speak up." Emily glanced around. The lot was nearly empty, save for a lone sedan parked crooked at the far end. No movement, but she noted it anyway. Habit. Jenkins reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. He unfolded it with care, revealing a plain black USB drive. "This," he said, "was from the meeting I wasn't supposed to be in." Emily took the drive with 2 fingers, slowly, like it might explode. "It's audio only," Jenkins continued. "A discussion between Donald, Nathan, and, believe it or not, your old chief accountant. They were talking about reallocating funds to what they called a temporary tax shelter." Donald thought it was brilliant. Nathan sold it as clean and reversible. But it wasn't clean, and they never reversed it. Emily closed her hand around the USB, her pulse quickening. "Did you tell anyone else?" "Number not after what happened. After I objected, they cut me out. Offered a severance package that was basically hush money, disguised as gratitude. And when I didn't take it, Nathan showed up at my daughter's school." Emily's breath caught. "He threatened her?" He didn't have to say the words, just stood near her car, waited till she looked up, then left. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant whine of a subway train and the hum of vending machines from the nearby building. Jenkins exhaled hard. "I don't want my daughter to grow up believing that silence is the right thing to do." Emily's throat tightened. She looked at him, really looked, and saw the kind of quiet courage that gets no headlines, no courtroom triumph. Just a man trying to scrub the guilt from his soul. "I promise you," she said, voice low but steady. "There's a way to use this without putting you or her in harm's way. I know what I'm doing." Jenkins gave a bitter smile. "You always did. It was everyone else who refused to see it." They shook hands, not a formality, something deeper. Something that had waited years. Then a noise. A soft click from somewhere nearby. Not loud, but not accidental. Emily turned sharply. Her eyes scanned the lot. The crooked sedan still hadn't moved, but she now saw the faint glow of a phone screen from the front seat. "Get in your car," she told Jenkins. What? Now. He obeyed without question, fading into the shadows as she stepped back toward her own vehicle. The night was too quiet now. Staged. Her heels echoed too clearly. She reached for her driver's side door, then stopped. Something blinked red above her. She looked up at the security camera mounted on the pole near the entrance gate. A small light was flashing, rapidly. Recording. Live feed. Her reflection stared back from the camera's lens, narrowed eyes and tight jaw. Someone knows. Someone had been watching. Maybe even listening. She stepped back, spine tingling. Jenkins had disappeared down the ramp. Good. At least he was safe for now. But Emily's safety, that was a luxury she could no longer afford. Not with the truth in her hand. The USB felt heavier in her coat pocket than it had a minute ago, and in her mind, the walls were already shifting. If she moved forward, there was no retreat, no more safe middle ground. She looked back at the flashing red light and whispered, "Let's find out who's afraid of the dark." He tried to toast to family. I raised a glass to consequences. The dining room of Solus Prime sparkled with low lighting and ego. Velvet curtains, sleek marble floors, and soft jazz notes danced above a sea of expensive perfumes and designer suits. Donald Carter stood at the head of the private dining space, wine glass raised high like a monarch blessing his court. To legacy, he proclaimed, smiling to the room filled with loyal employees and hand-picked shareholders. And to Nathan, the future of Carter Enterprises. Polite applause echoed through crystal and cutlery. Nathan, grinning, placed an arm around Chloe and waved modestly like a king in waiting. Emily sat at the far end of the table, half lit by a sconce, swirling her wine without sipping. The heat from her chest rose slowly, anger brewed with anticipation. Donald continued, "Next year, I'll begin transferring my executive duties. Nathan's helped modernize the books. He's brought fresh eyes, loyal investors. We're stronger now than we've ever been." Laughter, clinking glasses. Emily rose. The room quieted, not because of respect, but confusion. She hadn't spoken at any public event like this in years. "I have a toast too," she said, voice calm but crisp. To oversight, to accuracy, to real numbers. Donald lowered his glass. "Emily, if this," she cut in, reaching into her bag and producing a crisp printout, "is Nathan's vision for financial strength, then maybe someone should explain Everspring." Chairs scraped, brows furrowed. Even Chloe looked uncertain for a flicker of a second. Emily held up the sheet. An offshore entity, Cayman-based, not listed in any quarterly report. Yet over $300,000 have been funneled there from Carter Enterprises' consulting budget in the last fiscal year. A middle-aged shareholder, Mrs. Sanderson, squinted at the document. That wasn't in the latest board report. Nathan stood abruptly, laugh dry and forced. "You're not even on the board, Emily. What's this? A bedtime story?" "I'm not on the board," she agreed. "Yet. But I am on the records, legally, quietly. 30% stakeholder in Carter Holdings' largest portfolio investor. Which makes me..." She smiled, folding the paper. "A very concerned party." Chloe slammed her napkin onto the table. "You're obsessed. You can't stand seeing anyone else succeed." Emily turned slowly to her sister. "Success doesn't require lies, Chloe. Or laundering funds through dummy consultancies labeled under your name." Chloe blanched. Donald's voice boomed. "Enough. You're poisoning the air in a room meant to celebrate progress." "Progress?" Emily raised an eyebrow. "You mean this?" She slid a manila folder across the table to Sanderson, who opened it hesitantly. Inside was a copy of a falsified tax return, fabricated by Linda, modeled to mirror Nathan's offshore diversions. Fake, but eerily convincing. Gasps circled the room as Sanderson flipped the pages. "Who else knew?" someone murmured. Nathan laughed louder now, desperate. "This is ridiculous. Sloppy revenge from a jealous sister." Emily tilted her head. Funny, Nathan. You called me just an accountant. But accountants know how to read patterns. And this pattern, she tapped the Everspring sheet, isn't sustainable. Donald's face had gone pale. The bravado in his eyes had flickered, replaced with a strange, uncertain calculation. Then he slammed his wine glass down. You want a war, Emily? He growled. You'll get one. The room held its breath. Emily smiled. Just a little. She already had it. They couldn't silence me, so they tried to erase me. The elevator doors closed in front of her, muting the buzz of the office behind. Emily leaned her head against the cool metal wall, fists clenched at her sides. For a moment, she let herself feel it, the heat of humiliation blooming beneath her skin. She had just lost the biggest contract of the quarter, maybe the year, and she knew exactly why. The meeting had started with charm and ended in frost. James Thornton, senior partner at Everlane Investments, had looked her in the eye as he slid the unsigned agreement back across the glass table. There are rumors, Emily, he had said gently, as if he pitied her, that your fund is entangled in something unethical, an offshore laundering scheme. It's not just whispers anymore. There are images, emails, internal records. She had blinked, trying to steady her breath. That's impossible. We vet every holding. If there were red flags, it's not about reality. He interrupted, voice flat. It's perception. This deal was built on trust. And right now, you've lost that. The elevator dinged. She stepped out into the marble lobby of Carter Holdings, still gleaming, still cold, as if nothing had changed. But something had. Her phone vibrated as she passed the receptionist. A message from Linda. He moved faster than we thought. Meet me in conference room C? Emily didn't even answer. She just walked. Past curious glances, past half smiles from people who had probably already seen the headlines. Because they were out there now. Nathan had leaked a doctored photo of her at a supposed luxury event in the Caymans, paired with a fabricated email suggesting she had arranged a shell company for tax evasion. It was clearly fake and clearly effective. Inside the room, Linda was pacing, laptop open, face drawn. I ran the metadata, she said as Emily entered. It's all planted. AI-generated documents, emails that were never in our system. But Nathan knows how the media works. They don't verify. They echo. Emily dropped into the chair opposite. And James echoed. Linda nodded. It won't be the last. Others will back away unless we go public. File charges. Make our own narrative. I can't, Emily murmured, rubbing her temples. If I go public, I can't keep my seat. I'll have to withdraw from the fund to avoid conflict of interest. Then step down, Linda said, tone firmer now. He's not just going after your business. He's rewriting your identity, piece by piece, like you never existed. Emily stared at her, then at the flickering screen. A news ticker ran along the bottom of a finance blog. Carter Fund executive under scrutiny for potential fraud. Her chest ached, not from fear, but from the weight of choosing. If she went silent now, she could salvage part of her reputation. Keep her role, wait for it to blow over. But she knew Nathan. He wouldn't stop. And even if she stayed standing, she'd be a ghost in her own life. She stood. I need a lawyer, she said quietly. Linda paused. You're serious? I am. By late afternoon, Emily was sitting across from an older woman in a steel gray suit, in an office overlooking Bryant Park. The lawyer, Ms. Chandler, listened with a detached calm as Emily laid it out. All of it. The betrayals, the records, the plan. When Emily finished, Chandler leaned forward. This won't be easy. Nathan will counterfile. You'll be on every financial blog by tomorrow. And you'll need to suspend your directorship during the process. I know. Chandler's expression sharpened. Then let me ask the only question that matters. How much are you willing to sacrifice to protect your name? Emily didn't hesitate. All of it, she said. I'm done being erased. Some voices speak louder when written. The hallway smelled of cumin and fading paint. Emily followed Linda up the third flight of narrow stairs in a walk-up apartment in the heart of Brooklyn, each step creaking like a warning. The kind of place no one looked twice at, which was exactly why Mrs. Chan had chosen it. She doesn't trust phones, Linda whispered. Or email. She only agreed because of what she saw on the news. The fake tax return you exposed. It scared her, reminded her of what she signed. Emily didn't answer. Her heart thudded heavier with each step. Linda knocked 3 times, short and sharp. The door opened a crack. A pair of wary eyes peered out, then the chain slid free. "Come in," Mrs. Chan said, voice quiet but composed. The apartment was clean, modest, sparse. A worn couch, mismatched kitchen chairs, and a coffee table that doubled as a document vault. Everything about it was temporary, hiding. Mrs. Chan looked older than Emily remembered. Gray streaks through her jet-black hair, lines beneath her eyes that had nothing to do with age. She had been Nathan's chief accountant, a decade of loyalty that ended abruptly when she retired under mysterious circumstances. Now she poured tea into chipped mugs and placed a folder on the table between them. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice did not. "I knew he would cross a line someday," she said, sliding the folder closer to Emily. "But when I heard what he did to you, that he doctored images, corrupted contracts, I realized I stayed quiet for too long." Inside the folder were copies, scanned ledgers, transaction records, even post-it notes she'd written to herself at the time. Emily flipped through them slowly, her breath catching at the dates and amounts. "These match the Everspring transfers," Linda murmured. Mrs. Chan nodded. "He made me reroute consulting fees through dummy companies. One of them was under Chloe's name. She never knew. He said it was asset spreading." Emily's hands paused on a journal page. It was dated nearly 3 years ago. "Today I signed a false balance sheet under pressure. Nathan said if I didn't, my son's scholarship would be revoked. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd fix it later. But that day never came." She turned the page. "I stayed quiet once. I won't again." Emily swallowed hard. "Would you be willing to testify? Even anonymously? We could protect your name until the trial. The affidavit—" "I've already written it," Mrs. Chan interrupted. "Linda helped." Linda pulled out a manila envelope from her bag and laid it next to the journal. "We used coded initials and time-stamped events. Enough to verify, but not enough to expose her until we're ready." Emily looked at Mrs. Chan, feeling the weight of gratitude and guilt press behind her ribs. "Thank you. You don't know how much this means." "I do," Mrs. Chan said softly. "I was erased too." On the subway ride back to Midtown, Emily said nothing. She clutched the diary and the affidavit like talismans. The puzzle was nearly whole now. Every piece a scar, every name a wound reopened. Back in her apartment, she opened her phone and scrolled to a contact she hadn't used in years. Ronald Myers, Donald's boss, the real power behind the curtain. If he backed her, it would end Nathan's reign from the inside. She hesitated for only a second, then hit call. 2 rings, then, "Myers." "Mr. Myers," she began, voice steady. "It's Emily Carter. I believe we have something important to discuss. I'd like to set a meeting." There was a pause. Then, unexpectedly, a quiet chuckle. "I've been waiting for this." I wore red, not for celebration, but to be seen. The elevator's glass walls reflected the city skyline as Emily rose floor by floor, her silhouette sharpened against the morning sun. The color of her dress was no accident. Crimson, bold, arresting, unforgettable. Let them look. Let them whisper. Today, she wanted no shadows to hide in. When the doors opened to the conference floor of Foundry Capital's headquarters, silence met her. Not the empty kind, but the poised kind. The kind before verdicts. Ronald Myers stood at the head of the long table, his hands folded in front of him, his eyes trained on Emily as she walked in with calm, deliberate steps. Beside her, Linda carried a sealed case file and a USB drive. No theatrics, just truth, sharpened and ready. Donald sat stiffly 2 seats from the head, trying to look authoritative. Nathan reclined with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. Chloe, seated to his right, looked pale, her knuckles white against the polished wood. Ronald cleared his throat. This meeting was called under Article 7.4, he said. At the request of a minority shareholder, supported by preliminary findings of potential financial misconduct involving company funds. He looked toward Emily. Miss Carter, you may proceed. Emily stood, steady. Thank you, Mr. Myers. She turned to face the room, her voice clear. For the past year, irregular transfers have been made from our parent company's operational accounts into an entity registered under the name Everspring LLC, located offshore. These funds, totaling over $1.6 million, have been masked under consulting expenses and redirected through shell structures, some of which bear my family members' names. Gasps rippled down the line of shareholders. Donald shifted in his chair. Nathan scoffed. She's holding a personal grudge, he said, rising slightly. This is nothing more than a family spat. I was set to inherit a controlling role, and she? Emily cut in, not raising her voice but commanding the room. She was erased, lied to, forced out, and now she's here to restore what was stolen. She nodded at Linda, who handed the USB to the board's legal advisor. On screen, numbers flickered to life. Wire transfers, company names, account paths, and then the scanned affidavit, complete with Mrs. Chan's signature. Emily turned again. This testimony was submitted anonymously under whistleblower protection. It details, in her own handwriting, how she was coerced into falsifying documents under direct orders from Mr. Nathan Blake. The room fell into stunned silence. Then Chloe stood. At first, her voice faltered. She looked down, then up again, trembling. I was told to lie. Her laptop clattered as she set it down and spun it around. He told me to say the consulting payments were legitimate. He said if I didn't, everything would fall apart. Tears slipped silently down her cheek. Nathan rose abruptly. She's lying. She was part of it. She knew. Chloe turned on him, a sudden force behind her grief. You used me. Emily didn't speak. She didn't have to. Instead, she clicked on the last file in the presentation, a recorded audio clip clear as day. Nathan's voice filled the room. As long as Donald signs it, who cares? The board trusts him. That's the only signature that matters. Silence, except for the faint hiss of the air vent. All eyes turned toward Donald. Ronald's voice was quiet, but it cut through like steel. Did you sign these knowingly? When the truth is loud enough, even liars go silent. The boardroom had never felt colder, despite the full panel of warm bodies and rising tempers. Emily stood with her arms at her sides, the red of her dress now almost symbolic. Blood drawn, but not hers. Ronald Myers hadn't moved from his seat, pen in hand, the tip tapping ever so slightly on the folder in front of him. Chloe sat in stone-faced silence while Nathan paced behind his chair like a wolf cornered. Nathan broke first. You think this was all me? He snapped, spinning to point at Donald. He signed everything. Every transfer, every contract. I didn't move a cent without his say-so. The accusation hung in the air like a smoke bomb. Donald pushed back from the table, his face a mixture of shock and fury. That's a lie. You had proxy access. You said it was to streamline operations? I never approved those exact accounts. Nathan's laugh was bitter. Oh, come on. You think the board will believe that? You handed me the keys to the entire company and now you're pretending to be clueless? Emily didn't move, didn't flinch. She waited. Ronald cleared his throat and slowly unfolded a sheet of paper. We pulled signature records from the internal audit logs. Mr. Carter, I'd like you to look at this document. He slid it down the table toward Donald, whose hands trembled as he picked it up. This is a form authorizing a $250,000 transfer to Everspring LLC. This is the signature on that form. Ronald held up a printed scan. Now compare it to the signature on your notarized employment contract from 2 years ago. The difference was glaring, even to the untrained eye. The forged signature was rushed, slightly tilted, missing Donald's characteristic loop on the D. Donald's lips parted, but no words came out. Emily stepped forward, calm and composed. And just for clarity, I've brought both versions of the charter amendment. She held up 2 pages, one crisp and official, the other riddled with marks of whiteout and mismatched formatting. This, she said, lifting the fake, was slipped into the company's records after hours. The metadata shows the timestamp, midnight on a Sunday. Only 2 people were logged into the system that night, Nathan Lang and the company's night shift admin, who has already submitted a sworn statement. Nathan's face turned gray. "You were never supposed to see that file," he shouted, the words escaping before he could catch them. "You weren't even supposed to be part of this anymore." That was the moment the tide turned irreversibly. Ronald raised his hand. "That will be enough, Mr. Lang." He turned to the rest of the board. "In light of the evidence presented and the serious questions surrounding the handling of company funds, I am invoking Section 14 of the bylaws." He looked directly at Donald and Nathan. "Effective immediately, both Donald Carter and Nathan Lang are suspended from all company duties, pending a full internal investigation." Gasps rippled through the room. A senior board member dropped her pen. Another leaned back in disbelief. Chloe closed her eyes, quietly weeping. Donald looked gutted, a man unmoored. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but thought better of it. Nathan simply stared at Emily, the fire in his eyes replaced with an empty, seething glare. Ronald gathered his papers, stood, and gave Emily a small nod. "Miss Carter, thank you for your courage." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her truth had already spoken for her. As the board members began to shuffle out, some casting sidelong glances at Donald and Nathan, Emily walked out alone. Her heels echoed down the corridor, the sharp rhythm of resolution. Outside the conference room, the elevator chimed. As the doors opened, a reporter stepped forward, her notepad already out. "Miss Carter," she said breathlessly, "we heard rumors about today's board meeting. Are you ready to make a comment?" Emily looked at her, then at the building behind. The past, finally crumbling. She smiled, just slightly. "Not yet," she said, "but soon. They tried to burn me. Now they stand in the ashes. The office smelled different without him. Cleaner, emptier. As if Nathan's departure had left more than just a vacancy. It had sucked the poison out of the walls." Emily stood at the glass window of the top floor, watching the city breathe in a slow, quiet rhythm. Below her, the world moved on, unaware of the collapse that had just taken place in the Carter Empire. The door creaked. She turned, half expecting Linda or a board member, but it was Donald. He looked thinner, smaller even, as though the suspension had chipped away at the very posture he once carried like armor. His suit hung loosely, and the cufflinks, always a symbol of power, were missing. "I came to clear out my desk," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Didn't think you'd be here." Emily didn't move. "It's my office now." He nodded, eyes drifting across the room. "I thought I was protecting the company," he muttered. "I didn't know I was erasing you." Emily's face softened, but only for a breath. "You didn't erase me. You just made room for who I really am." He closed his eyes just briefly, then placed a worn keychain on her desk. The old company emblem. "I never thought it would be you." Emily looked down at the emblem. "Neither did I. But I'm not here because of what you thought." Donald lingered a second too long, then walked out. Across the city, Chloe sat across from her therapist. Her hands trembled as she whispered, "I want to know who I am. Without him." No more designer distractions, no more curated social media smiles. Just a young woman unraveling the damage thread by painful thread. She didn't ask for forgiveness. Not yet. But for the first time, she asked herself questions. In a dimly lit office, Linda flipped through folders, scanning news alerts on her second screen. Nathan Lang has been declared a person of interest in a federal investigation, she read aloud. Fled to the Caribbean. Assets frozen. She leaned back, letting out a tired laugh. Cowards run fast. Emily, sitting across from her, allowed herself the first deep breath in days. It's not over, she said, but it's quieter. They toasted with coffee instead of champagne. At night, Donald sat alone in the dining room, the silverware laid out meticulously. Across from him was an untouched plate. The silence wasn't new, but this time it didn't feel noble. It felt earned, a reminder. Jenkins, now back in his old neighborhood, walked his daughter home from school. She held his hand tighter than usual. She didn't know why, but he smiled anyway, holding on to something that couldn't be forged. Peace. The next morning, Emily stood before her father's old office door. The nameplate had been replaced. Emily Carter, interim CEO. She ran her fingers over the engraved letters. It felt strange, wearing a title she'd once been denied, now handed to her not as a gift, but as a prize won through fire. She walked inside. Everything was where it used to be. The heavy desk, the stiff-backed chairs, the stale air of decisions made behind closed doors. But now, on the desk, lay a thin envelope. Elegant. Embossed. She opened it. Dinner invitation, Ronald Myers and Global Partners. 7 p.m., the Skyline Room dress code. Formal topic, strategic global expansion. Emily stared at the words, then let out a slow exhale. War was over, but the next campaign, one of legacy, was just beginning. Blood may bind us, but trust is what makes a family. The dining table wasn't long or grand, not like the ones she used to sit at in her father's house. But every piece here was hers, each candle flickering gently along the runner, the mismatched but carefully chosen plates, and the floral centerpiece Jenkins's daughter had picked out at the morning market. It felt warm, real, like a room meant for truth, not performances. Emily adjusted the place cards one last time, even though she knew everyone coming didn't need names to find their seats. The doorbell rang. She opened it to find Chloe standing with a bottle of wine, a hesitant smile painted across her face. Her hair was loosely tied back, and there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Less entitlement, more searching. I didn't know if I should bring anything, Chloe said. This is fine, Emily replied. Come in. They hugged. It was awkward, brief, but it was the first time in years that Chloe's embrace didn't feel like an act. Inside, Jenkins was already seated, his daughter perched beside him, talking excitedly about her scholarship essay. Linda stirred something on the stove, joking about how corporate lawyers should never be trusted in the kitchen. As the table filled with quiet laughter, Chloe glanced around as if trying to absorb the new rhythm, the new rules. No need to impress, just exist. Smells amazing, she said. Linda chuckled. Credit the grocery store and a sprinkle of redemption. Jenkins raised his glass first. To the truth, he said, voice clear, hand steady. No matter how long it takes to come home. Everyone followed. Glasses clinked, eyes met. They talked and ate, swapping stories and scars, and for the first time in a long time, Emily didn't feel like she had to defend herself at a dinner table. Later, while helping Jenkins's daughter with her coat, Emily heard a soft knock at the door. She opened it slowly. Donald stood there. He wasn't holding anything. Not a gift, not an excuse. Just his weathered face, eyes tired, posture unsure. The porch light cast a pale ring around him, but he didn't cross the threshold. Emily didn't say anything. He nodded once, not quite a bow, but something near to it. A silent gesture of remorse, or perhaps surrender. She held the door open for a second longer than necessary, then gently let it close. Inside, Linda placed another log into the fireplace. Chloe poured more tea. Jenkins pulled out his phone and showed a picture of his daughter receiving her scholarship letter. She cried when it came, he said. I did too. Emily smiled. You earned that moment. No, Jenkins replied. We did. All of us who refused to stay quiet. Chloe looked over, teacup in hand. I've started therapy, she said. Turns out, knowing who you are doesn't come from someone else's approval. Emily reached across the table and touched her wrist gently. That's the first step. For a moment, no one said anything. The silence was full, not of tension, but of gratitude. A strange peace settled into the room. Emily leaned back in her chair, scanning the faces in front of her. No shared bloodlines, no inherited obligations, just people who had chosen each other, despite pasts, despite pain. She stood and raised her glass once more. This, she said softly, this is family. They raised theirs in return. As the room hummed with laughter again, Emily's phone vibrated. She picked it up discreetly under the table. One new message from Myers. Are you ready for what's next? They once called me nothing. Now they call me CEO. The hall was silent for a second. A long, suspended breath held by hundreds. Then came the wave. Applause rising like a tide. Flashbulbs crackling in the air. Murmurs rippling through rows of suited shareholders and skeptical reporters. But Emily Carter didn't flinch. She stood tall in a tailored black suit, the red silk blouse beneath catching the light like flame. Not the kind of red worn for rage or revenge, but for presence, for power. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble as she stepped onto the stage, each step marking the path she had clawed back for herself. The Carter name was no longer borrowed or tarnished. It was hers again. Ronald Myers stood at the podium, his expression formal, but his eyes warm. He gestured toward the crowd, then turned to her. We don't just name CEOs, he said, voice ringing clear. We recognize leaders. The applause grew again, but Emily waited until it softened before she approached the microphone. She took a quiet breath, not to calm herself, but to own the space. Then she spoke. I don't stand here because of luck, she began, each syllable steady, deliberate. I stand because I refuse to disappear. Gasps, a few scattered nods. The press at the back scribbled quickly. She continued. For years I was overlooked, underestimated, even erased. But erasure is never permanent. Not when you choose to write yourself back in. Linda stood at the edge of the stage, arms crossed, smiling like a sister who'd watched the whole battle and believed in the ending all along. Chloe was seated in the front row, hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes shimmering, not with regret, but with release. Jenkins was near the exit, nodding as if he already knew this moment would come. Beside him, a woman in her 70s, his mother perhaps, watched with quiet awe. She didn't clap. She just stared, her proud gaze unblinking. Emily stepped to the table beside the podium. A heavy leather folder sat open, gold seal glinting beneath the lights. She picked up the pen with both hands, looked out across the room once more, then signed. Emily Carter, Chief Executive Officer. A standing ovation. Reporters surged forward with questions, but she ignored them. Her eyes locked on the camera at the center aisle, red light glowing. She stepped forward, spoke not to the shareholders, not to the board, but to the unseen ones. The girls watching from rooms where they were told to be quiet. The women passed over for promotions. The children of strict fathers, the victims of polished liars, the ones who chose truth over silence. Her voice, low and unwavering, filled the room. To those watching, never let anyone write your ending. Then she walked off stage, not as a daughter seeking approval, not as a woman reclaiming what was lost, but as the one who rewrote the story. The applause faded, but what lingered was something deeper, a silence filled with respect. Emily Carter had not only reclaimed her name, she exposed every lie meant to bury her. The journey from invisibility to power wasn't easy, but it was hers. Justice doesn't always arrive with fanfare. It often walks in late, carrying scars and speaking the truth others tried to silence. Like a storm breaking through years of fog, it clears the path for what's real to be seen. Because in the end, no amount of deceit can outlast a woman who refuses to be erased. Like, share, and subscribe if this story moved you. Comment 1 if you felt seen, or 2 if something still held you back. Your voice matters.